Okay, friends, we have addressed three clear matters that still matter to God. The first is that Yehovah is God, and He is the one who delivers His people. The second is that His people are to have no other gods in His presence, His face behind, in front, above, or below Him. The third is that if anyone lifts up His name in a false vow, they are in deep trouble. Now for number 4, where there is a clear shift, so it seems. It all starts with the first word of the fourth matter. Do you know what it says? My name is Keith Johnson of Biblical Foundations Academy International. Our mission is to inspire people around the world to build a biblical foundation for their faith, even if it takes a bit of digging to get to the intended meaning of Scripture. Let's keep studying in this fourth installment of our series, 10 Matters That Still Matter to God. Welcome to Scripture Bites. Well, here we are again in the Scripture Bites interface, where I get to let you see the tools I use to dig into my studies. Hopefully, I will show you enough fruit from the process to inspire you to keep studying with us. CB, please upload our control verse for the fourth matter that still matters to God. Our control verse comes from Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 in the King James Version. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. This first part of the verse seems pretty straightforward, and if I'm reading it correctly, it even seems quite easy to do, I think. If my wife says to me, remember our anniversary, all I have to do is write it down on the calendar, place it into my reminders on my phone, and maybe even put a note in the car or on the refrigerator. Can you imagine this interaction when the anniversary comes and there are no flowers, cards, gifts, or even an acknowledgement of that special day? I can imagine the blank stare on her face when she looks at me and says, you forgot our anniversary. But I say, no, I did. Look, I have it written down on my calendar. It's in my phone reminders, and come and see, I even have a note in my car and on the refrigerator. I remembered. I have to be honest and wonder if the translation of this first part of the verse causes such a look from God to His people if they say, look, we remember the Sabbath. Okay, so maybe we celebrate it on a different day and do whatever we please on that day, but we remembered. Okay, now let's see if the scroll source can help us out here. Remember, we are reading from right to left, and we will have CB add the important Masoretic vowel markers to help us in the pronunciation and understanding of our control verse. Zechor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho. Let's take a closer look at the first Hebrew word, Zechor. Grammar alert. This word is a verb in the cal infinitive absolute. What does that mean? Well, folks, let's get busy finding out, since it might be that if we can understand the meaning of this Hebrew word, that blank stare on God's face will disappear. Here is where CB and I would have a conflict if I requested that she display the Hebrew verbal forms chart that I use, and she would probably say it's not available, blah, blah, blah. But I've found a way around her. For our premium content library subscribers, I have a secret. We are preparing an upgraded, less argumentative, and smarter version of the CB so we can get into the deeper issues of the Hebrew grammar and a whole lot more. I can hardly wait for the upgrade.
I heard that.
Ooh, okay. In fact, we have a test series available right now for our premium content library members called the 3T mini-series. It begins the process of learning a bit more about the Hebrew language. Where was I again? Here is what this verbal form of Zechor, remember, means. CB, please open reference window and upload Gesenius Hebrew grammar on the infinitive absolute.
Loading Gesenius grammar.
Thank you. The infinitive absolute is employed to emphasize the idea of the verb in the abstract, i.e., it speaks of an action or state without any regard to the agent or to the circumstances of time and mood under which it takes place. Now, where this Hebrew grammar becomes really important is that in our verse, this infinitive absolute is functioning as an emphatic imperative. In fact, the King James Version translators acknowledge this in a very interesting way. Now, before I go further, let me warn you, we are touching some translator nerves that often are taboo in some circles. I would like to show you one very important example of how the emphatic imperative of the infinitive absolute is translated. CB, please make reference windows side by side and display our control verse next to Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 12a. As you can see, the first word of both verses has two identical vowel markers placed in the same position. However, the consonants are different. When Moses retells the 10 matters in Deuteronomy as he remembered them, hint, hint, he uses a different word, but in the same infinitive, absolute, emphatic, imperative form. In our control verse, God says, Zekor, remember. When Moses retells it, he says, Shemor, keep. Guess what? Both words are calling for the same action. If you Zekor, remember, with your mind, you will also Shemor, keep or guard through your actions. Are you getting this? Okay. CB, please display the first place in Scripture where Zekor in the infinitive absolute form as an emphatic imperative is found.
Uploading Exodus 13:3.
Thanks again. And Moses said unto the people, remember this day in which ye came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by strength of hand the Lord brought you out from this place. There shall be no leavened bread eaten. Exodus 13:3 KJV. Behind the word remember is the exact same word, Zekor, in the same form and with the required action in the same verse. By remembering in the infinitive absolute with an emphatic imperative, the action is that no leavened bread will be eaten. In other words, celebrating the feast of unleavened bread is the action of remembering. There's one more thing I absolutely have to show you. CB, please recreate reference window side by side and display our control verse next to Exodus chapter 20 verse 8 in the Samaritan Pentateuch. Exodus 28 says this, Zekor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho. That's the scroll source. This verse looks almost identical except for three things. The first thing is that there are no vowel points employed in the Samaritan version of the Torah. In fact, they use different letters of an ancient Hebrew script. However, CB is unable or unwilling to display those letters. The second thing you will notice is the last word that has an additional hey in the word lekadsho. More on that word later. More importantly, notice the first word of the verse. Instead of Zekor, they use the exact same word Shemor found in parallel passage of Deuteronomy chapter 5 verse 12. It seems that the Samaritan scribe was not comfortable with Moses doing a little ad-libbing, so he fixed the parallel passage. The more important issue is the use of the word Shemor, meaning guard or keep, to remove the possible ambiguity of Zekor. Remember. Now, back to the first part of our control verse. Remember the Sabbath day. Now, the question has to be asked. How are we to remember the Sabbath day? The expected action of just how to do that is expressed in one simple but powerful word, lekadsho. CB, please deconstruct the word. The first thing we noticed is the first letter is a lamed, which is a preposition meaning to or for. The second thing we notice is the expected three-letter root, kadash, which you may recognize as the root word meaning holy. Finally, the last letter, vav, that represents the third person masculine suffix, it. Now for the grammar alert. This word, lekadsho, is a verb in the PL infinitive construct. CB, please open the reference window again and upload Gesenius' Hebrew grammar on the infinitive construct this time.
Opening Gesenius.
The infinitive construct, like the infinitive absolute, may also represent a verbal noun, but of a much more flexible character than the infinitive absolute. Its close relation with nouns properly so called is especially seen in the readiness with which the infinitive construct may be used for any case whatever. Gesenius goes into great detail about the many ways this form of the verb can be used. For our purposes, we simply want to acknowledge that it is functioning in this way and that it is in the PL mode, which indicates intensification of the verb. So instead of the noun holy, the word in the PL mode is intensified to mean to sanctify. The short answer to the question about the grammar of this word is that the action of remembering is to sanctify, set apart, make special, or dare I say, treat God's Sabbath day as holy. Whew. When the King James Version translators saw this word lekadsho, they even went so far as to slip in the English word keep, just to be sure you didn't miss the expected action that is inherent in the first part of the verse. Even though the Hebrew shamor, to keep, is nowhere to be found in the scroll source of this verse, the translators took the liberty of adding it. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. In a roundabout way, the King James Version translators acknowledge the Hebrew grammar by adjusting the English words to help convey the meaning. Now, if they would have let me be on the translating committee, I would have argued for something like this. Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. Exodus 20 verse 8, Scripture Bites version. The asterisk indicates that I would add a note saying you can only fulfill this important matter by following through with the action of sanctifying this special and significant day known as the Sabbath. Now, let's memorize this short verse with our minds and sanctify it with our actions. Zechor et Yom HaShabbat Lekadsho. Zechor, remember, sounds similar to Shamor, guard or keep, that we see in Deuteronomy chapter 5:12. Et Yom HaShabbat, the Sabbath day. Lekadsho, to sanctify it. One more time, repeat after me. Zechor et Yom HaShabbat Lekadsho. Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. I'm sure there has to be at least one Scripture Bite student out there who wants to know how to translate the small word et. Well, in the next matter, we will unpack it. Or should I say, unpack et. If we keep reading the following 3 verses, we can see the required action explained in a clear and concise way. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger who is within your settlements. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the 7th day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. That's the new JPS. Now for you serious Scripture Bite students, we have added another 7, count them, 7 key verses from Scripture about the Sabbath that will help you in your application of this 4th important matter that still matters to God. Now until next time, keep, wait for it, studying.
This is your SBI assistant. Did you enjoy this Scripture Bite? If so, share it with your friends. Be sure to become a free member at bfainternational.com to download a PDF companion study guide for this edition of Scripture Bites. Visit bfainternational.com today to join the conversation.